In last week's video, it was quite heartwarming for me because the Marie in the story he is sharing was actually my grandmother, and I was glad to know he had that conversation with her before she passed. In chapter 26, his exploration of Edgar Cayce and Bible research into reincarnation was fascinating. If you missed it, it's definitely worth a listen. Now let's see what happened next in Father J's life. Chapter 27. Direct Contact. In the spring of 1971, I went to Spain with two friends. All three of us spoke Spanish and went to places most Americans never visit. We traveled to the churches where John of the Cross and Teresa of Avila were honored, and to the shrine of James the Apostle in Galicia. It was also part of the trip to visit the famous Prado Museum in Madrid, where I had seen the painting of the crucified Christ on a previous trip. On that trip, the hair on my arms stood out and goosebumps covered my body when my eyes fell on that painted image. My patron saint is St. James the Greater. I had a relic of St. James in a cross that I cherished very much. I wanted to take that relic with me to Spain, where he is the patron saint. I could not find that relic. I looked everywhere and no sign of it. I finally got in bed, exhausted. I prayed to find the cross in the morning. When I woke up, I reminded my guides, "Don't forget about that relic. You have to help." I stopped in the middle of the sentence. Looking at my suitcase with the clothes packed in it, I noticed something on the very top of the clothes. The relic. I was grateful once more. We arrived in Madrid, Spain, and so it was natural that one of the first places we visited as tourists was the Prado Museum. About halfway through the guided tour, we were led into a large room with one huge painting that took up the entire front wall. The tour guide began to relate the history and meaning of the painting. There I was, standing in the middle of the room, which held about 50 people. As soon as I had directed my attention to the painting in question, I immediately went into trance. I guess that is what you would call it. I was actually painting that same picture. Everyone in the painting came alive and were posing. I was the artist, directing them to stand in a certain spot. I was well along into the painting when suddenly someone apparently bumped into me while backing up. It was enough to knock me down. As I was going down, my hands broke the fall. It was somewhat painful, but my hands and arms prevented me from hitting my head on the marble floor and possibly cracking it open. My subconscious, or whatever, saved the day. I was actually unconscious until I hit the floor. Let me say that it was a rude awakening. My traveling buddy, Tom, came running toward me when he saw me on the floor. He didn't know what to make of it, and neither did I. I couldn't answer his question when he asked me what happened. I told him I was just standing there with the rest of the folks, listening to the tour guide, when suddenly I was the artist himself completing this huge painting. Interestingly enough, the artist had included his own portrait in that picture. I couldn't help wonder if I ever looked like that. After I explained to Tom what happened, he asked who painted it. I said I didn't know. So we both went up closer to the painting and saw the signature. It was a Spaniard and a rather famous name. I would rather not mention that name here. To me, the name was not as important as the experience itself. It dawned on me at that very moment that two different psychics on two separate occasions had told me I was that artist. The two of them did not know each other. I did not, of course, place much confidence in the words of a psychic. But it sure hit me hard when I realized that they both named the artist that produced that painting. I was really starting to get concerned now. Why were these things happening to me? That was the second time I went into a trance state, and I didn't even know what a trance state was. And I still don't. Then I had to reconcile my 4 a.m. visits, which offered 14 incarnations that were supposedly my past lives. Instead of resolving my quest of pursuing truth through meditation, the trance experiences and the last of the 4 a.m. visits caused me more confusion. What was I supposed to believe now? Up to that time, I had received a limited academic education. That was the normal process of education in the United States for the priesthood. I had no other tools with which to examine the concept of life and death other than that provided by the metaphysical or empirical point of view, by experience. The information offered in the seminary or at the University of Detroit did not even approach the subject. I wanted to know because I was experiencing something not found in books recommended by proper authority. I could not resolve this dilemma. I had always been a model student and priest. I believed in the principle Roma locuta causa finita, which is Latin for when Rome speaks, the discussion is finished. I respected the word of my superiors and the established teachings of the Church. What do I do? The answer came unexpectedly, as usual. I was visiting Mundelein College in Chicago the following summer. I stopped to see a couple of nuns who were studying there. While at supper, we were discussing the possibility of communicating with one's spiritual guides. Since I seemed to have already tapped in on some form of communication, I thought I would follow the recommendations one of them had read in a book. When I returned home, I meditated now with a specific purpose in mind. Could I establish an ongoing conversation with my guide who had visited me 40 nights in a row and then some at 4 a.m.? I would try, and did, and tried again. Finally, there was a communication established. Slowly at first, then picking up speed to a normal conversation. I was surprised again. I started out asking questions right away. I had a lot of questions. What had happened to me did not so much give answers, but raised a lot of questions. I now felt free to converse. I asked, first of all, about the visitations during the night. Why at 4 a.m.? What was so special about that hour? These guides, there were often 2 or 3, were pretty smart in giving proper assistance. Instead of simply telling me the answer, they made me work for it. The answer could be found in a book called The Yoga of Light, they told me. Fine, I said. Where do I find such a book? I doubt if the regular bookstore would carry it. They named the store where I could purchase it. It was called the Mayflower, a store specializing in metaphysical books. When I finally got time to go to that store, I walked in and saw books everywhere, from the floor to the ceiling. There were several rows of books. Some books were piled up on the floor. Obviously, there were too many books for the size of the store. The books that were on a shelf did not appear to have any order by title or category. So I went to the desk where there was a young girl apparently in charge. She was reading a popular magazine, chewing gum wildly. I said politely, "Do you have a book called The Yoga of Light?" She said she didn't know anything about the books. So I asked, "Is the owner in today?" She replied that he had gone somewhere that morning and was expected sometime later. She did not know when exactly. I thought to myself, okay, guides, you got me here. There is no way I am going to go through thousands of books trying to find the one you mentioned. Go straight ahead to the third aisle, they said with confidence. I did. Turn to your right. I did that too. Their last statement. Take 3 steps, stop, and turn to your right. I did just that. And there it was, staring at me in the face. The Yoga of Light. It was the only copy on that shelf, and probably the only one in the entire store of more than 10,000 books. This incident helped me to place more trust in my guides. They had not failed me. I was still seeking an easier way out. I again appealed to an alternative. Why do I have to read that book in preparation for your answer? They emphasized again that I would not be able to apply what I was learning unless I fully understood it, internalized it, and owned it. They were not answer people. They were spiritual guides. Their work was to groom me at a pace that kept me balanced and spiritually healthy as I moved forward. This was the first of many books they recommended, and they only named another book when they felt I was ready for the next step. The guides were very conscientious in their role as counselors. They apparently were careful that I received the greatest spiritual benefit from their recommendations, and I did. I recall once asking them if they knew what numbers were going to come out in the lottery the next day. They said they did. Fine, I replied. How about some help here? They quickly reminded me that they did not deal in material matters. I said, how about winning to raise funds for the church and for the poor? No deal, they repeated. Then they cautioned me about asking such questions. They knew, however, that I was only testing them. But their point was clear, and I never pursued that line of thought again. I got serious again. I inquired whether these guides were responsible for waking me up for 40 nights in a row and instructing me with cosmic and mystical experiences. They replied in the affirmative. Were they the ones who led me into the seminary by means of the voice that did an incredible job of getting me to the seminary and encouraging me each year to stay there? They were indeed. Where does Christ fit into that picture? They describe themselves as his helpers. Why didn't you help me when I needed you the most after my parents' death? Making the decision to be ordained was certainly the most important decision in my life up to that time. Where were you? We were right there beside you, but we were not permitted to make that decision for you. Our role was to get you there. The final decision was yours, and you chose correctly. 5 times I asked an explanation of the vision the 4 of us children had back in 1937. Each time they said I was not ready. I asked in the early 70s, middle 70s, always with the same answer. I wondered when I would have sufficient awareness to comprehend the vision. If it was so profound, why did we as children have it in the first place? To be at peace, I let go of it mentally. My guides occasionally referred to me as a mystic. It was not easy for me to accept that title. My concept of a mystic is a person who is holy, receives unfused knowledge or infused contemplation, and obviously has mystical experiences as a natural and normal result of sublime meditation and an extraordinary prayer life. Did they make a mistake, labeling me as a mystic? That's what I asked. Their reply is that I should rethink why so many miraculous events accompanied my presence, and why was I so gifted with experiences about which an average person can only dream about or hope for. I slowly accepted the fact that I was rather frequently given rare experiences, that my prayers after years of aridity were answered in a framework far beyond that which I could not even wildly imagine. In humility, I thank God for the joy and the sorrow, the sickness and the health, the satisfying moments as well as those frustrating ones that form character and strength. Without those horribly difficult assignments I had in my early years as a priest, when the cross was quite heavy, almost to the breaking point, I would never have been so motivated to pursue truth and thereby discover the direct action of God's love and providence in my life. In a way, I became grateful. In the course of time, I read many books, some of them recommended by my guides, others I simply found on my own in bookstores. I would usually check with the guides to see if they approved of a particular book I bought. Not all were acceptable. The guides warned me about some New Age material on the market. Some of the authors distorted the truth, while others were not even close to the truth. A sincere reader who did not have proper discernment could be led astray in their well-meaning quest. I was fortunate to have good helpers. I believe, through the years, I have received several hundred answers to questions I did not know at the time, and many hundreds of comments on a wide variety of issues. I have them all recorded on tape and also transcribed on paper, but I have been strongly advised not to share them publicly, at least not up till now. I talked with several priests concerning my experiences. They were totally unaware of what I was talking about. They never heard nor read about such things. I even went to a priest who was known for his advanced spirituality. I was sure he had similar experiences. He had no knowledge of what I experienced. I was both surprised and disappointed. Even with his very rich background in spirituality, apparently he and I had entered different realms of communication with divine guidance. Neither was better than the other. They were simply different paths toward truth. Chapter 28. Experience is Knowing. I have always been interested and fascinated by pyramids, even as a child. Since my youth, I managed to collect many pyramid-shaped pendants or medallions. One of my dreams was to actually go to the pyramids in Egypt. The memory of the ones in Mexico never left me. Since the trance experience in Mexico, I read whatever I could find about pyramids. While at St. Michael's in Pontiac, I was awakened one night at the usual time, around 4 in the morning. Upon awakening, I thought I had to go to the bathroom. I got out of bed and, out of habit, was walking toward the bathroom. But it wasn't there. I was wide awake, not sleeping. I knew the difference. I also quickly realized that I was in a different place. Just where was I? I kept questioning myself. As I kept walking, I noticed a little light about 20 feet further. As I approached the wall, I found myself looking at hieroglyphic writing. I said to myself, "Good heavens, I'm in a pyramid. Is this Giza?" I was not sure what my next move was. I could barely see, but it was just bright enough for me to pass through a narrow hallway into a larger hall. What I saw in that hall were the most colorful, vivid, and radiant murals. They depicted scenes of the gods acting upon the earth. It looked like a fresco just painted within the hour. I have been to many museums. Nothing compared to the brilliant colors and larger-than-life scenes on the wall. While I was admiring the painted walls, I didn't realize there was someone else in the hall. He was dressed in a long garment similar to a cope, studded with precious jewels. He reminded me of a high priest of some sort. Then his face kept changing. It must have changed 1,000 times. It was almost continuous motion, one face after another, covering every race, culture, and creed. He looked stern and serious, young and old, male and female, until finally his face changed no more. His final appearance reminded me of a Middle East person, dark olive skin, completely bald. "What are you doing here?" he inquired. He was serious. I told him I was not sure. I didn't even know how I got there. He looked at me straight in the eyes and asked, "Do you know what room this is?" "The Hall of Initiation," I replied hesitantly. "I don't know where I got that information." "That is correct. Do you know what happens here?" Again, the answer came to my lips. "Those deemed worthy are initiated into the White Brotherhood." "Is that your wish?" I did not answer right away. Then I slowly said with assurance, "I now believe that is why I am here." He said, "Lie down," which I did. There was no table to lie on, but I leaned back and found myself lying down in midair. It seemed quite natural at the time. He lifted both hands very slowly, then stretched out his hands over my body. My body started to shake, as if I were shivering, although I knew at that point it was pure energy penetrating my whole body. I remained lying there, immobile, with the sincere feeling that I was being transformed by a tremendous power. When it was completed, I felt myself returning briskly to my room. I was back in my physical body, but conscious of my body still shivering somewhat. I couldn't sleep for a long time, considering the impact of what had just happened to me. The next day I questioned my guides about the incident. I asked if that was the Pyramid of Giza. They said no. The pyramid I entered was of such exciting and lively colors because it belonged to another dimension. Later, I was told that the initiation took place in the 6th dimension, to be exact. They said it was a real experience. I said, "Please explain." Here's what they said. In 1956, you were ordained on earth into the priesthood in the three-dimensional world, but now you have been blessed from on high into the White Brotherhood. You are in good company. After reflecting a long time on their words, I looked up the references to the resurrection and ascension of Jesus, as they recommended. In Mark 16:5, the women went to anoint the body of Jesus. Upon entering, they saw a young man sitting at the right, dressed in a white robe. He told them Jesus had been raised up. He is not here. Again, at the time of Jesus' ascension, as recorded by St. Luke in Act 1:1, two men dressed in white told the disciples, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand there looking up at the skies? This Jesus who has been taken from you will return, just as you saw him go up into the heavens." Members of the White Brotherhood also conversed and comforted Cayce often in his walks behind the A.R.E. Center. I made a trip to the Cayce Foundation at Virginia Beach, Virginia, called the Association for Research and Enlightenment. They simply referred to it as A.R.E. I made the trip with two other friends who were also seekers of truth and open to metaphysics because of some personal experience they also had. I had to see for myself if there really was such a gifted person alive in my lifetime. Edgar Cayce died in 1945 when I was only 15 years old. He spoke profusely about the Essene community who lived in Palestine around the time of Christ. Not many people believed there was such a community. Cayce predicted that absolute proof would be given 2 years after his death. In 1947, exactly 2 years after Cayce died, the Dead Sea Scrolls were discovered in the caves of Qumran, proving beyond doubt the truth of his statements and confirming the description he often gave about the social and religious life of the Essenes. I regret that I had never met Cayce. The belief system of my teenage years did not permit even the remote possibility of an encounter with him. The workshop we signed up for was mainly about the ancient Egyptians. People came from all over the United States. It was exciting and comforting to know that we were not alone in this matter. Those who attended were well-educated, refined persons who were also seeking the truth of what had happened to them. The lecturer based his quotes on the 15,000 readings that came through Edgar Cayce. I said came through Mr. Cayce because all of the readings took place while Cayce was completely unconscious. Almost every topic you can think of was covered in the readings. He was extremely accurate in diagnosing sicknesses or conditions of a person and giving remedies to resolve the situation or heal the sickness. He only needed the person's name and birth date. His eyes were never opened during a reading. There have been many books written about this phenomenal man who is known as the world's greatest psychic. If interested, begin with There is a River by Thomas Segru, The Sleeping Prophet by Jess Stern, or Many Mansions by Gina Sermonera. While I was in the recording rooms checking my tape recorder in between lectures at the A.R.E., I backed into another participant of the workshop. Most people meet with a handshake. We, on the contrary, met by backing into each other and almost knocking each other down. We both apologized, then looked at each other's name tag. We discovered that we were both from the Detroit area. That led us to become good friends. She was a nurse and her husband was a thoracic surgeon and chief of staff at Bon Secours Hospital on the east side of Detroit. When we returned home, we began a study group based on a book that came through Edgar Cayce while he was unconscious. It was called The Search for God. The book was excellent for persons starting on the path of meditation and spiritual growth. Along with a group of about 7 people, I learned many things that have contributed to my own personal development. Thank you for listening, and please join us every Sunday at 3 o'clock for our watch party as we premiere the next chapters of Father J's book.